Welcome in for a quick Inside Carolina commitment reaction. UNC football picked up a big name over the weekend. Cornerback Zion Ferguson out of Georgia, decommitted from the LSU Tigers, committed to North Carolina. Don Callahan joins me. Don, big news for North Carolina football. How did this all go down ultimately?
This actually, I know the news broke over the weekend, but this has been something that North Carolina has been pursuing for a year plus, and Charlton Warren really for 3 years, as Zion will point out. They got him to come on campus last summer. He visited a bunch of schools over the summer, ended up committing to LSU, UNC specifically. Charlton Warren stayed on him pretty hard, and they were able to draw him back to campus in early March for what was a weekend where the visitors attended the UNC Duke basketball game, and then also the next day, the first spring practice of the year. And that kind of set the stage for this official visit. And this official visit obviously resulted in a commitment switch from LSU to North Carolina.
So, what does Zion offer North Carolina from a skill set perspective? 6 foot, 161 ish. It seems like a lot of these guys are in that range, but particularly he's a four-star kid. Obviously, if you're committed to LSU, you're pretty strong on the football field. What does he skill set wise bring to North Carolina and Charlton Warren's room?
So he's the Atlanta area really has done a really good job of developing defensive backs. They have a lot of really good DB trainers specifically training for that position. And he's kind of fits that mold as one of those guys who has been from a very young age training specifically to play the defensive back position. So he's very polished. He's a guy who's going to do all the little things right when it comes to coverage. In addition to that training, I think on the East Coast, the Atlanta area is the most advanced and the most competitive area when it comes to high school football. And what I mean by that is, DBs are being challenged and are playing against offenses that are as sophisticated as they get on the high school level. And as a result, those DBs are as sophisticated and are as knowledgeable as any you're going to find on the East Coast. And so he's all of that benefits him, and that's what he's going to bring to North Carolina. A kid who is very, very polished. As you mentioned, he's 6 feet. He's tall, long, has really good speed and all of that. But really, just how polished he is what kind of stands out.
So when you look at the cornerback room, obviously Jason Jones, Charlton Warren doing work there. Ferguson is a nice pickup. Was committed, decommitted, and committed to North Carolina. So how many? When you look at this class, the 2024 class, North Carolina, obviously working at getting multiple commitments early in the process, and we've talked on the noon dish about how this class should be done by the end of the summer. Where does North Carolina stand now, specifically in the cornerback, defensive back, safety rooms in this 24 class?
I think that they sit at a really good spot. They want a lot of DBs. We're probably looking at 5+ defensive backs, and they have 4 committed right now. They're in a really good spot with the others that they're looking at, and they could get into, or they may be in a spot where they can get a little selective. I mean, there were some guys. There are 2 DBs who were supposed to officially visit North Carolina this past weekend, along with Ferguson, and they were told, hey, we're kind of filling up right now, so let's not take this official visit, which kind of speaks to just where UNC is at with the DB group, where, like I said, starting to get a little bit more selective. But obviously there are additional, kind of fish out there that they're trying to reel in to kind of finalize. But Ferguson puts them in a spot to where they're slowly kind of creeping up to the numbers that they want for this class at the DB position.
So Ferguson had some ties to North Carolina. I believe his grandmother from Durham.
Hmm.
So that always helps. But what ultimately do you think? And you've done some wonderful work on Tar Pit Premium message boards on Inside Carolina Premium stuff with the Ferguson write ups, really all the write ups recently of the hot recruiting that's going on in college football, specifically North Carolina. But what do you think particularly turned Ferguson to North Carolina?
So just to kind of lay it out a little bit, just his connections. So his grandmother still lives in Durham and lives, I think he said, like 15 minutes away from Chapel Hill, from UNC's campus. And his mother graduated from Hillside High School. So if you follow football recruiting, you know Hillside really well. Although they haven't produced a whole lot of recruits recently, there was a time where they were just kind of pumping them out. In addition to that, both his mother and father graduated from Winston-Salem State. So definitely strong ties, a lot of family in the area. When I talked to him after he switched his commitment, he mentioned, hey, I'm going to be here a lot because, one of the hardest things, as anyone knows who travels, one of the most expensive things, the hardest things to figure out is lodging. Well, if you have grandmom who's 15 minutes away, that makes that part so much easier. You don't have to worry about check-in times and all that sort of stuff. But as getting back to your actual question, I think it was just the persistence of North Carolina, just kind of staying on him. And I think also, the situation at LSU was kind of changing too. And so I think that kind of benefited UNC. And so just that kind of that combination of the two just really helped kind of allow this to materialize. And then, I mean, he mentions just, you know, the impressions they made, just how comfortable he is on campus, how everybody says hi to you, and all, he had great conversations with all of the coaches, all of the staffers, everybody that worked at UNC, and just felt comfortable. And I'm sure, his parents not just feel comfortable when they're there in Chapel Hill with those coaches, but around the area because as I said, family in the area. So and they're familiar. His mom probably knows Durham really, really well and knows Chapel Hill really well, and those sort of things all factor in.
So when you're looking at this, and you mentioned it earlier, but I do want to circle back and wrap this show up here. He's from Georgia. And you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned the sophistication of the offenses down there, and therefore the sophistication of the defenses, and it's particular to defensive backs. North Carolina's been heavy in Georgia. At the Showtime camp that I covered with you this weekend, ton of Georgia kids, though in later classes. Is this a trend that's going to continue for North Carolina, especially in the defensive back room, pushing guys or pulling guys out of the Georgia area? And do you think, and how does that benefit North Carolina, Mac Brown, and his staff going forward?
So, Georgia is and has always been a big part of UNC recruiting, and really underneath all the coaching staffs. And the reason is pretty simple. And we talked about this on one of the Noon Dish podcasts, where I quizzed you about the top talent producing states. And if I remember correctly, it was like Texas, Florida, and then I believe number 3 was Georgia, ahead of California. Maybe I'm wrong. A good double check. What was the big state that was kind of knocked out of there by Georgia? But either way, you look at Georgia's size compared to some of these other states, population, all that sort of stuff, and it's pretty impressive just what Georgia produces. Mac Brown always talks about that 6-hour radius. Well, Atlanta, and really we talk about Georgia, but it's really Atlanta. I mean, it's really that area. Like when I go down there to check on recruits, I'm not leaving the Atlanta area very often. It's almost exclusively that Atlanta area. And so Atlanta is within that 6-hour radius. It's also, as having a daughter who has to go down to Georgia a lot, it's an easy flight from RDU. It's like under an hour, and they have direct flight, obviously, so that makes it all the more easier. Also, so yeah, I mean, Georgia is always going to be a prime area for North Carolina recruit. The issue is, though, it's also the heart of SEC country. So UNC really is going to have to rely on their evaluations because they're not going to get the top tier kids from that area just because they're going to Alabama, they're going to Georgia, they're going to, even though it's not an SEC school, they're going to Clemson, and all the other SEC schools that recruit that Atlanta area. So really, but there's so much talent there that you can definitely kind of live off of those second tier, third tier guys.
Yeah, North Carolina has found fruit in Georgia. Some Georgia peaches. Zion Ferguson, the latest cornerback, 6 foot 160 ish, national recruit ranked in the 300s or top, 305-ish. We'll say that because those rankings always fluctuate. That's Don Callahan. I'm Tommy Ashley. Check us out on the Noon Dish every Wednesday now, back to Wednesdays at noon, live on the Inside Carolina YouTube channel. And certainly check out Tar Pit Premium Message Boards and Inside Carolina's premium content, where Don Callahan puts his work together for everybody to see that's a member. Don, appreciate your time, buddy.
Thank you, Tommy.